Welcome, dear listener. Settle in, dim the lights, wrap yourself in a blanket. Tonight, we're stepping into a world that has been largely hidden from view. A world of opulent castles, grand halls, and shadowed corridors. A world where power, privilege, and danger coexisted quietly, and where survival often depended on wit, patience, and resilience. We are going to explore the lives of medieval concubines. These were women who lived in the courts of kings, lords, and nobles. They were close to power, yet distant from safety. Their lives were full of luxury and refinement, but also of strict rules, constant observation, and at times harsh treatment. Their stories have been whispered in history, rarely recorded with honesty, and sometimes misunderstood or ignored altogether. Imagine stepping into a castle in the early morning. The sun is just beginning to pierce the high walls, casting long shadows along stone corridors. Servants hurry with quiet urgency. The smell of baked bread and polished wood fills the air, and somewhere in the distance, the lord or master prepares for the day. And in the midst of this activity, there is a young woman, her future uncertain, her position precarious, and her every move closely watched. This is not a story of fantasy or exaggeration. These are lives shaped by real rules, real social pressures, and real human emotion. These women were trained to maintain appearances, navigate courtly etiquette, and manage relationships with those around them, all while facing the constant threat of being replaced, overlooked, or dismissed. It is a story of human ingenuity, resilience, and the subtle forms of power exercised in environments most people will never truly know. You might be asking yourself, why focus on concubines? Because their lives reveal the hidden machinery of medieval society. They were intermediaries of influence, sometimes confidants to powerful rulers, often key figures in maintaining alliances, and occasionally silent witnesses to historical events. By understanding their world, we glimpse the social structures, gender dynamics, and the delicate balance of power that shaped history itself. Now, imagine this life in detail. Each day began with preparation, hair brushed and adorned, garments carefully chosen and arranged, etiquette rehearsed. Every gesture, where you walked, whom you greeted, how you spoke, was observed. Each interaction with the master, the household, or fellow women was a potential advantage or risk. Small mistakes could be corrected, but repeated missteps might have serious consequences. The environment was one of constant scrutiny, demanding discipline, poise, and intelligence. Despite this, there was room for cleverness and subtle power. Concubines learned to navigate rivalries, form alliances, and use information wisely. They discovered that influence was not always public. Sometimes it was quiet, indirect, and measured. A well-placed word, a careful display of loyalty, or an understanding of social dynamics could protect one's position for months or even years. These women were students of human behavior, strategy, and survival, often mastering skills that would be studied today as diplomacy, negotiation, or psychological insight. Yet, it was not all strategy and intrigue. Life could be lonely and restrictive. Walls constrained movement, and rules governed interactions. Emotional bonds were complicated by hierarchy and secrecy. Moments of companionship might coexist with jealousy or manipulation. Comforts of wealth could not erase the sense of confinement, and luxuries were balanced against the weight of obligation. Every privilege came with responsibility, and every responsibility came with risk. But we must not simplify. These lives were complex. There were moments of humor, moments of unexpected kindness, moments of quiet rebellion. A shared glance, a whispered joke, or a discreet act of defiance could create small victories in a world that demanded obedience. Humor, humanity, and resilience were quietly exercised in ways that history rarely records. As you listen, imagine the textures of the medieval world: the cold stone underfoot, the softness of velvet garments, the scent of herbs and candles, the distant echo of voices along corridors. Imagine the unspoken rules, the careful calculations, and the unending vigilance required to survive each day. And imagine the inner life of these women, the hopes, fears, cleverness, and courage that allowed them to endure in a world structured by power, hierarchy, and societal expectation. This journey is not meant to shock or sensationalize. It is meant to illuminate, to immerse, and to bring attention to lives that history has often overlooked. We will explore daily routines, rivalries, ceremonies, challenges, and subtle forms of power. We will examine how these women influenced the politics, culture, and social fabric of their time, all while navigating the constraints of their roles. By the end of this exploration, you will see concubines not as mere figures of scandal or curiosity, but as complex individuals navigating a demanding, often harsh, and intricately ordered world. You will witness their skill, courage, and ingenuity in ways that are both relatable and extraordinary. So, get comfortable. Let your mind settle. Open your imagination to the corridors, chambers, and hidden spaces of medieval life. We are about to enter a hidden world, a world of privilege and peril, power and limitation, strategy and survival. A world where every glance, every gesture, and every choice carried meaning. And remember, this is just the beginning. There are 18 chapters ahead, each uncovering a different facet of life, from preparation and hierarchy to rivalry, influence, and the challenges that define survival. We will explore routines, forbidden knowledge, alliances, childbirth, ceremonies, punishments, and reflections on power. You are here now. Don't look away. The story of medieval concubines is not just about the past. It is about the human experience of resilience, adaptation, and navigating complex social landscapes, lessons that resonate even today. Take a deep breath, step quietly into this world, and let us begin. The sun has barely risen over the castle walls, casting long, sharp shadows across the cobbled courtyard. The scent of fresh bread and heated stone mixes with the faint aroma of herbs drying in the early morning air. Birds flit along the battlements, singing cheerfully, unaware of the human dramas unfolding below. And there, in a quiet chamber tucked behind heavy wooden doors, is a young woman whose life is about to change forever. She does not yet understand the world she has entered. She has been summoned, not quite chosen, not quite free, to serve in the household of a powerful lord. The castle is a labyrinth of corridors, chambers, and stairways, each echoing with whispered instructions, the clatter of servants, and the ever-present watchful eyes of attendants. This is the first morning of her life as a concubine, though the word itself carries a complicated weight that she will only fully grasp with time. The first shock is the environment itself. Everything is larger, louder, and more imposing than she imagined. Massive wooden doors carved with intricate patterns, tapestries that swallow entire walls, polished stone floors that chill the feet, and countless faces, servants, guards, attendants, other women, all observing, measuring, judging. The young woman senses immediately that every step, every movement carries significance. Here, nothing is accidental. Everything matters. Her first task is deceptively simple: appearance. Hair combed, clothing adjusted, jewelry aligned. But this is not mere vanity. It is preparation for a world where appearances communicate power, status, and obedience. A misaligned hairpin or wrinkled garment could spark whispered judgment or draw the attention of superiors in ways both subtle and significant. This is her first lesson in a life defined by scrutiny. She is guided by an older woman, a senior concubine, who has navigated this world for years. She moves with the confidence of experience, showing the young girl how to bow correctly, how to greet attendants, even how to measure the timbre of her voice when speaking. Every gesture is a test, every step a rehearsal for performance. Your life, the mentor whispers, will depend on your skill in reading people more than your skill with needle or pen. By mid-morning, the new concubine is introduced to the household staff. Kitchen maids bustle past with trays of bread and stew, chambermaids scurry to clean, and other concubines watch from the corners of their chambers, assessing the newcomer. Her eyes catch fleeting expressions: curiosity, subtle judgment, perhaps even a hint of envy. She understands immediately that relationships here are both necessary and treacherous. Alliances must be formed, rivalries navigated, and trust metered carefully. The lord of the household, a figure of commanding presence, does not appear immediately, but his influence is felt everywhere. Instructions, expectations, and subtle social pressures ripple outward from his office, filtering down through the hierarchy. Servants speak cautiously, attendants move with practiced efficiency, and the young woman senses that every detail of her day will be shaped by this unseen authority. Power here is as much invisible as it is visible. By noon, the young woman is learning her schedule. Meals, grooming, lessons in etiquette, and supervised interactions occupy the hours. Even leisure is carefully managed. Walks through the garden are allowed only with an attendant, and conversations with others must be measured and purposeful. She quickly discovers that freedom is a carefully managed illusion, and that independence, when it exists, is as much about perception as reality. Her first encounters with fellow concubines are both fascinating and unnerving. Some are older, experienced, confident in their status and in their understanding of the household's unspoken rules. Others are like her, new, uncertain, and observing closely to learn the rhythms of life here. The air is thick with subtle signals, glances that communicate warnings, smiles at mask strategy, small gestures that indicate allegiance. She senses quickly that social intelligence may matter as much as obedience or beauty. Afternoon brings lessons in etiquette and protocol. She is shown the correct way to address attendants, how to navigate the drawing rooms without drawing undue attention, and how to speak when in the presence of superiors. The mentor explains, "A single wrong word can echo farther than you realize. Silence is sometimes safer than speech, and a carefully chosen word can be a shield." The young woman realizes the stakes. This is not a simple life of luxury. It is a life of constant calculation, of navigating visible and invisible boundaries. By evening, the household begins to settle. Candles are lit, shadows stretch across tapestries, and the corridors grow quieter. The young woman is exhausted, not physically, but mentally, emotionally, and socially. She has learned lessons in observation, restraint, and performance that will guide every day to come. And yet, there is a spark of curiosity and determination. She senses that within this structured, demanding environment, there are opportunities to gain influence, protect herself, and perhaps even find moments of small joy. Night brings a quiet reflection. Alone in her chamber, she touches the smooth wood of her bedpost, listens to the distant sounds of laughter, conversation, and footsteps in the castle, and begins to imagine what her life might become. She feels a mixture of fear, excitement, and determination. She is aware of the power dynamics around her, the hierarchy that defines every interaction, and the constant need for vigilance. And yet, there is hope, a sense that intelligence, patience, and courage may allow her not just to survive, but to thrive in this hidden, complex world. This first day is only a beginning. Tomorrow will bring lessons in social navigation, strategy, and perhaps the first encounters with rivalries that could shape her entire experience. She has entered a world of hidden power, subtle influence, and carefully managed danger. She will learn to walk its corridors, observe its signals, and master the delicate balance between visibility and invisibility. By mid-morning, training extends to household chores and roles. Even minor tasks, lighting fires, folding linens, arranging flowers, carry lessons in discipline and attention to detail. Mistakes are noted and corrected, often with quiet admonishment. The mentor explains that perfection is not always required, but the appearance of competence, precision, and obedience is essential. A single repeated misstep can mark one as careless or untrustworthy. Physical posture is another crucial element of training. Standing, walking, and sitting are all guided by rules that communicate elegance, deference, and presence. The young woman is taught to move with grace, to control gestures, and to maintain composure even under stress. Posture is not superficial. It is a language of power, subtly signaling readiness, respect, or alignment with the household's hierarchy. Conversation, too, must be honed. Words are measured, tone controlled, and topics carefully chosen. The mentor emphasizes that speaking at the wrong time, to the wrong person, or about the wrong subject can have consequences far beyond embarrassment. Humor, curiosity, and cleverness are permitted, but only within the boundaries of careful social navigation. The lesson is clear: voice is power, but misuse of it is vulnerability. As the day progresses, the young woman is introduced to the arts of refinement. Music, dance, embroidery, and reading are more than hobbies. They are tools for influence and social survival. Competence in these areas demonstrates cultural literacy and readiness to participate in courtly life. A misplayed note or poorly embroidered garment may seem minor, but in this world, even small lapses can affect standing and opportunity. The mentor also instructs on strategic observation of others. Understanding rivalries, alliances, and preferences is essential. Knowing who favors whom, who is quick to anger, and who can be persuaded quietly is as important as mastering hair, clothing, or etiquette. The young concubine learns that success is rarely a matter of brute skill. It is a matter of reading people, anticipating reactions, and adjusting behavior carefully. Afternoon brings supervised practice in social interaction. The young woman participates in conversations with attendants, other concubines, and even minor officials. She learns to balance honesty with discretion, kindness with caution, and initiative with restraint. Every interaction is a lesson in judgment, timing, and perception. Small victories, earning a smile from a senior concubine or a nod of approval from an attendant, become motivation to continue mastering her environment. By evening, grooming lessons resume, emphasizing subtle details: a strand of hair out of place, the angle of a head when listening, the positioning of hands while seated. The mentor reminds her that these details communicate discipline, attention, and value, not just to the household hierarchy, but to the Lord himself. Subtle errors may be harmless in isolation, but repeated mistakes can become cumulative, shaping reputation over time. Nightfall brings reflection. Alone in her chamber, the young concubine recalls the day's lessons and the multitude of rules she must navigate. She begins to understand that obedience is both protection and opportunity. By mastering the rules, she gains security. By observing carefully, she gains influence. And by performing with precision, she demonstrates competence and intelligence. The day also carries emotional lessons. Isolation, scrutiny, and the pressure to perform can feel overwhelming. Yet, within these constraints, the young woman begins to recognize small pockets of autonomy: a smile shared with a kind attendant, a successful completion of a task without correction, a quiet moment in the garden. All provide brief relief and a sense of accomplishment. Survival is as much about small victories as it is about navigating danger. As she prepares for sleep, the young concubine contemplates the road ahead. The household is vast, the rules complex, and the hierarchy intimidating. But she also senses that intelligence, patience, and careful observation may allow her to not just survive, but find moments of influence, respect, and even subtle joy. The lessons in grooming, etiquette, and discipline are not trivial. They are the first steps in a long journey of understanding the balance between power, vulnerability, and resilience. Tomorrow, the training will continue, expanding into alliances, rivalries, and deeper understanding of the household's social dynamics. The young concubine will learn that every gesture, word, and action carries weight, and that survival depends on mastery of both self and perception. So take a deep breath and imagine walking beside her through the stone corridors, feeling the weight of expectation, the thrill of small victories, and the constant awareness that every step is both observed and significant. Her life, like that of all concubines, will be a careful dance of obedience, observation, and quiet strategy, an intricate journey in a world hidden behind closed doors, opulent walls, and the shadows of power. The story of medieval concubines is one of discipline, resilience, and adaptation. It is not sensationalized, it is lived. And it is in these details, the grooming, the etiquette, the careful observation, that we begin to understand the hidden power and subtle influence these women exercised in a world that demanded precision, patience, and intelligence. The castle corridors seem quieter today, but the air is thick with tension. Our young concubine has moved beyond the basics of grooming and etiquette. She now begins to understand a more subtle truth. In this hidden world, power and vulnerability are inseparable companions. Every glance, word, or action carries weight. Every interaction can shift her position, reputation, and even safety. She starts her day observing the dynamics between other concubines, attendants, and minor officials. It becomes clear immediately that life here is a delicate balance. Some women carry themselves with quiet confidence, drawing attention only when necessary. Others maneuver aggressively, seeking influence through alliances, whispers, or subtle intimidation. Our young concubine notices that power is rarely visible in a single gesture. It exists in patterns, strategies, and the ability to anticipate human behavior. Her mentor explains that vulnerability is not a weakness. It is a condition of life in this world. Even the most favored concubine is constantly observed, measured, and assessed. A misinterpreted word, an unlucky gesture, or an ill-timed display of emotion could unravel months of careful positioning. She learns that vulnerability can be protective if acknowledged and managed, but dangerous if ignored or exploited. Mid-morning brings the first encounter with a senior concubine who has been in the household for many years. She is a master of subtle influence. A raised eyebrow here, a small smile there, a seemingly casual comment that shifts perceptions across the room. The young concubine watches carefully, understanding that power is often silent, indirect, and strategic. It is a game of observation, patience, and timing. The lesson of the day is reinforced during the morning assembly in the main hall. The Lord presides, and the women present themselves according to long-established rules. The young concubine notices how slight variations in posture, gaze, and speech affect how each is received. The favored concubines sit slightly forward, engage with confidence, and demonstrate both respect and subtle assertiveness. Those less favored maintain distance, careful to avoid drawing attention or seeming presumptuous. The line between favor and disfavor is razor thin, and every action contributes to it. Between formal sessions, she begins to understand the nature of alliances and rivalries. Conversations in side corridors are carefully monitored. Whispers can carry more weight than formal instructions. A smile or glance can signal support or subtly warn of disapproval. The young concubine realizes that intelligence is not enough. Social awareness and emotional acuity are equally essential. Reading the room is as crucial as any lesson in etiquette or grooming. By afternoon, practical lessons deepen her understanding of vulnerability. She witnesses minor infractions, a misstep in greeting a guest, a slightly exaggerated gesture, or a word spoken too boldly. The consequences are subtle but effective. Shifts in demeanor from others, quiet whispers, or cold, silent treatment. It becomes clear that even small errors can ripple across the household, affecting status, influence, and opportunities. Lunch offers a moment to observe the informal power dynamics. The favored concubines choose their seats carefully, selecting proximity to the lord or senior attendants. Those lower in favor occupy less desirable spots, often at the edge of conversations. Here, she sees firsthand how physical space mirrors social hierarchy. A gesture, a word, or a smile can shift influence subtly yet significantly. Power is distributed not only by title or assignment, but by perception, attention, and calculated presence. Later, the young concubine is taught about emotional regulation as a tool of power. She learns to conceal irritation, mask envy, and moderate displays of joy or disappointment. A visible emotional reaction may signal weakness, while controlled, thoughtful responses convey intelligence and composure. This is not about suppression. It is about strategic presentation of self, ensuring that reactions are deliberate, measured, and influential. The lesson continues with small tests of discretion. She is instructed to observe a conversation between two senior concubines, noting the subtleties of body language, tone, and word choice. Afterward, she must report her observations to her mentor. The exercise teaches her that attention to detail in human behavior is a form of power. Recognizing intentions, hidden meanings, and subtle signals allows her to navigate the household safely and strategically. By late afternoon, the young concubine is introduced to a challenge designed to teach resilience. A task is assigned with ambiguous instructions, requiring her to exercise judgment, initiative, and subtle negotiation. Missteps are corrected gently but firmly, emphasizing that decision-making is both necessary and risky. Here, vulnerability is part of learning. Mistakes are lessons, but misjudgment can also create exposure and tension. Evening arrives with lessons in discretion and loyalty. The mentor shares stories of concubines who navigated the household successfully and those who faltered through miscalculation, misplaced trust, or overconfidence. These anecdotes illustrate that power is a fluid, negotiated condition, not a fixed position. It is gained and lost daily, shaped by skill, perception, and circumstance. As night falls, the young concubine reflects on her day. She has learned that power is inseparable from vulnerability. To influence others, she must observe carefully, act strategically, and manage her own emotional responses. To survive, she must anticipate others' moves, understand the subtle rules of hierarchy, and navigate rivalries without losing composure. Each lesson reinforces that her life is not simply about privilege or beauty, but about intelligence, awareness, and resilience. She contemplates the dual nature of her existence, surrounded by luxury, yet constrained by rules, close to authority, yet constantly measured, capable of influence, yet exposed to risk. She begins to see the household as a living organism, a network of power, alliances, and observation, where survival depends on mastery of both external appearances and internal acuity. And so, the day ends with understanding and quiet determination. The young concubine recognizes that she is no longer just a newcomer learning to follow instructions. She is now an active participant in a world where every choice, gesture, and glance carries consequence, and where resilience, intelligence, and careful observation are as essential as obedience and grace. Tomorrow, her lessons will expand further into the intricacies of daily life, social navigation, and strategic influence, deepening her understanding of both the privileges and the perils of her role. She is beginning to comprehend that survival here is not about power alone, but about the delicate interplay between control, perception, and the courage to act wisely within constraints. Take a deep breath, dear listener. Walk with her along these castle corridors. Feel the weight of expectation, the thrill of small victories, and the subtle tension of constant observation. The journey has only begun, and already the lesson is clear. In the hidden world of concubines, power is subtle, vulnerability is constant, and survival is an art. Morning arrives with the soft glow of sunlight spilling over the castle walls. The corridors echo with the footsteps of servants and attendants, each sound a subtle reminder that life here is a constant performance. For our young concubine, the day begins as it always does, with rigor, observation, and preparation. The daily routine is both a guide and a test, an intricate dance that blends expectation, duty, and careful calculation. The morning begins with a gathering in the Great Hall, ostensibly for lessons in etiquette and refinement. Sunlight streams through stained glass, casting colored patterns across the polished floors. The concubines stand or sit in careful formation, awaiting instruction. The young concubine notices immediately that the atmosphere is charged. Glances are exchanged, subtle gestures signal unspoken hierarchies, and every interaction is weighted. Here, rivalry is woven into the fabric of daily life. Her mentor introduces her to the delicate art of reading social tension. A slight tightening of the jaw, a lifted eyebrow, a carefully timed laugh, all communicate intention, opinion, and strategy. The young concubine quickly realizes that every subtle movement is a message, and that understanding these cues is essential to navigating relationships safely. Misreading even a single interaction could lead to social missteps or loss of favor. Mid-morning brings a practical lesson in handling conflict. Two senior concubines engage in a subtle, indirect argument over seating arrangements and presentation. Words are carefully chosen, tone controlled, and gestures minimal yet pointed. The young concubine observes how influence is asserted without overt confrontation, and how alliances shift quietly. She begins to see that rivalry is not always loud or violent. It can be a silent, strategic game. She learns early that competition is inevitable. Resources, attention, and favor are limited, and each concubine seeks to secure her position. Some compete through skill, charm, or cultural refinement, others through alliances, observation, or subtle manipulation. The young woman understands that survival in this environment requires both self-awareness and strategic awareness of others. Afternoon lessons focus on strategic social interaction. She is given small tasks that require cooperation with other concubines, some of whom are overtly competitive. Success depends not only on completing the task, but also on maintaining alliances, navigating subtle rivalries, and demonstrating reliability. Mistakes, or perceived lapses in judgment, may be quietly noted, influencing future interactions. Through this, she realizes that every action and every word can have far-reaching implications. The mentor emphasizes the importance of timing and subtlety. A smile offered too soon, a compliment too freely given, or even a moment of visible satisfaction can be misunderstood or exploited. The young concubine begins to see the intricacy of power. Success is often about appearing neutral while building influence behind the scenes. Even leisure is not free from rivalry. Walks in the garden, time spent near the Lord's chambers, or participation in small domestic gatherings are all arenas for subtle competition. Glances, positioning, and casual conversation become measures of favor and influence. Observing how senior concubines manage these moments provides the young woman with practical lessons in tact, observation, and restraint. By late afternoon, she witnesses a confrontation that underscores the stakes of social maneuvering. A minor dispute over access to resources, a favored cushion, the attention of an attendant, or a decorative object, is escalated through carefully placed words and gestures. The concubines involved manage the situation with grace, cunning, and strategic misdirection, resolving the conflict without overt chaos. The young woman understands that intelligence, subtlety, and composure are essential tools in navigating rivalry. Evening brings reflection. Alone in her chamber, she recalls the day's encounters, the gestures she observed, and the subtle competitions she witnessed. She begins to catalog her experiences, analyzing alliances, rivalries, and potential strategies. She realizes that the world of the concubine is a complex social network, where success depends on the ability to read signals, anticipate moves, and navigate relationships with both caution and insight. The young concubine also begins to appreciate that rivalry is not inherently destructive. It fosters vigilance, strategic thinking, and social acuity, honing skills that will protect her and allow her to influence the household environment. Observing, understanding, and navigating these rivalries is a form of empowerment, offering both protection and opportunity. Nightfall brings a quiet moment in the garden. The young woman contemplates the duality of her life, surrounded by luxury, yet constrained by rules, close to power, yet constantly under observation, capable of influence, yet exposed to subtle threats. She understands that rivalries in silk and stone are part of a larger system, a hidden world where social intelligence is as valuable as beauty, obedience, or skill. She prepares for sleep, reflecting on the lessons learned, observation, patience, strategic interaction, and the careful negotiation of alliances and rivalries. She understands that success is not about domination, but about understanding, adapting, and maneuvering carefully within the household's complex social framework. Tomorrow, she will continue to explore these dynamics, learning how subtle influence, trust, and observation combine to shape life behind the castle walls. Each day adds layers of experience, understanding, and strategy, and she grows more adept at navigating the intricate social currents that define her hidden world. Take a deep breath, dear listener, and imagine walking beside her through the halls, observing the unspoken games, subtle gestures, and strategic interactions. Each day is a lesson in resilience, intelligence, and the delicate balance between power and vulnerability, and each encounter teaches her more about the art of survival in this hidden, competitive world. The story of medieval concubines is not simply one of luxury or constraint. It is one of adaptation, subtle power, and mastery of social strategy. Rivalries, competition, and observation form the threads of their daily lives, shaping experience, influence, and survival in ways often hidden from historical records. The castle is alive with movement, though much of it remains unseen to the untrained eye. Our young concubine has begun to understand that survival depends not only on obedience and etiquette, but also on the quiet exercise of influence. Here, power is subtle, and true authority often lies not with those who are visibly dominant, but with those who act strategically behind the scenes. Morning begins with observation. From her chamber window, she notices the daily rhythm of servants, attendants, and senior concubines. The Lord's presence is felt more than seen. An occasional word, a glance, a fleeting gesture, but its effect reverberates throughout the household. The young concubine begins to understand that influence is measured not by command, but by perception, timing, and subtle intervention. Her mentor instructs her on the first lesson of the day, identifying the levers of power. Influence may not be tied to position or age. It often resides with those who control information, manage alliances, or hold the trust of the lord or senior officials. Observing how decisions ripple through the household, she learns that understanding these levers allows one to anticipate outcomes, intervene subtly, and protect oneself from unforeseen risks. Mid-morning brings practical exercises. She is asked to assist in organizing the Lord's private papers and correspondences. While the task may seem mundane, it provides opportunities to understand priorities, patterns, and preferences. She notes who sends letters, the tone of communication, and the subtle hints about alliances, favor, and expectations. The exercise reinforces the idea that information is power, and that careful management of what is known, and when it is known, can shape influence quietly but effectively. By lunch, the young concubine observes the interaction between senior concubines during the meal. Their conversation is layered with meaning, subtle compliments, strategically placed questions, and careful attention to tone and posture. Through these exchanges, she begins to see that power is exercised through subtle persuasion and social intelligence, often without the direct notice of the lord or household officials. Afternoon introduces a new lesson, using discretion to guide outcomes. She is paired with a senior concubine to oversee a small household task, such as arranging seating for a visiting envoy or supervising a minor ceremony. The young concubine learns that by choosing how to present information, who to involve, and when to act, she can shape perceptions and subtly influence decisions. Even a minor act, like adjusting the placement of a chair or offering a suggestion at the right moment, can shift attention, favor, and alliances. Influence, she realizes, often grows in silence. Observation is paired with reflection. The young concubine notices that influence is rarely permanent. It requires constant vigilance and adaptation. Those who hold sway can lose it in a single misstep or failure to anticipate the needs, moods, or strategies of others. She understands that sustaining influence is as important as acquiring it, and that awareness, patience, and flexibility are essential. Late afternoon brings lessons in subtle negotiation. The young concubine is taught how to mediate minor disputes among attendants or concubines, balancing fairness with tact, and ensuring outcomes that satisfy multiple parties. She sees that influence is not about asserting dominance, but about guiding others to decisions they believe are their own, a skill that creates trust, reinforces alliances, and maintains equilibrium in the household. Evening arrives with reflection and mentoring. The young woman recalls instances where subtle intervention altered outcomes, a misplaced comment corrected, a gesture adjusted, a whispered suggestion given at just the right moment. She begins to appreciate that real power often manifests invisibly, shaping perceptions, fostering trust, and influencing outcomes without overt action. Nightfall provides a quiet opportunity to integrate lessons. Alone in her chamber, the young concubine reviews the day's events, cataloging subtle shifts, observing alliances, and considering strategies for tomorrow. She understands that influence is cumulative, growing from careful observation, discreet action, and thoughtful interpretation of social dynamics. Her power lies not in command, but in the ability to navigate relationships and subtly shape the household's course. The young concubine reflects on her growth. Once a newcomer intimidated by rules, routines, and rivalries, she now begins to see herself as an active participant in the complex web of household dynamics. She understands that influence is not about entitlement, it is earned through observation, intelligence, discretion, and subtle strategic action. Each day adds layers to her understanding, refining skills that will ensure both survival and the potential for quiet authority. Take a moment, dear listener, and imagine walking with her through the castle, the polished halls, the quiet corners, the subtle gestures that communicate more than words ever could. Witness how influence is exercised in silence, how careful observation informs every decision, and how strategy unfolds without spectacle. In the hidden world of concubines, power is not declared. It is carefully cultivated behind the scenes. The story of medieval concubines is not merely one of beauty, luxury, or hierarchy. It is one of resilience, intelligence, and the quiet mastery of social strategy. Influence is earned, vulnerability is managed, and survival depends on a keen awareness of both people and circumstance. Each day, each observation, and each carefully measured act strengthens her capacity to navigate a world of hidden power and subtle authority. Morning arrives softly over the castle, yet the quiet is deceptive. The corridors echo with subtle tension, whispers, and calculated movements. Our young concubine has learned that influence is delicate, but today's lessons take her deeper. Survival depends on the careful cultivation of secrets and the forging of alliances. Knowledge and loyalty are intertwined, and a single misstep can undo months of careful positioning. The day begins in the common chambers, where the concubines gather for instruction. Her mentor reminds her that not every conversation, gesture, or smile is harmless. Some carry hidden meanings, subtle tests, or covert strategies. The young woman listens carefully, noting who speaks first, who remains silent, and how reactions are measured. She is learning that alliances are formed in small moments, and secrets can be both shields and weapons. Mid-morning brings practical lessons in alliances and trust. She is paired with a more experienced concubine for a collaborative task, arranging ceremonial items, overseeing the servants, or assisting in a household function. Success depends not just on completing the task efficiently, but on working in harmony, understanding her partner's tendencies, and subtly negotiating differences without drawing attention. Through this exercise, she learns that alliances are not merely social bonds, they are strategic tools for influence and protection. By late morning, she observes a subtle power struggle. Two senior concubines, long rivals, negotiate a compromise over resources and attention from the Lord. Their interaction is quiet but precise. Gestures, tone, and timing communicate far more than words. The young concubine realizes that alliances are fragile, constantly shifting, and often built on subtle observation rather than explicit agreement. Understanding these dynamics allows her to anticipate outcomes and position herself advantageously. Lunch provides another layer of insight. Conversations are carefully moderated, laughter timed, and gestures measured. The young woman notices how trust is displayed subtly. Shared glances, private remarks, and confidential gestures signal the presence of alliances. She begins to see that secrets are currency. Knowledge shared selectively strengthens bonds, but indiscriminate disclosure can create vulnerability. Every interaction carries potential gain or loss. Afternoon brings lessons in managing information discreetly. She observes how senior concubines handle sensitive news, rumors, and household politics. One misplaced word could shift perceptions, alter alliances, or provoke jealousy. She learns that survival requires careful judgment in deciding what to share, when to share it, and with whom. Even small details, like a glance or a casual comment, can have far-reaching effects in a household that watches and remembers everything. A practical exercise tests her skills. She is given partial information about a household conflict and tasked with advising her mentor on potential solutions. The young concubine must weigh alliances, anticipate reactions, and consider consequences. Through this, she learns that information must be interpreted, balanced, and applied strategically. Knowledge without wisdom can be dangerous. Insight without discretion can be fatal. Later, she observes a small act of strategy between two concubines. A carefully worded compliment, a discreet gesture, a subtle alignment during a group task. These minor acts shift favor and influence over time, revealing that power is built incrementally through repeated and thoughtful actions rather than dramatic displays. She begins to understand that survival in this world is a blend of observation, subtle maneuvering, and careful relationship management. By evening, she is introduced to the concept of loyalty and selective vulnerability. Trusting another concubine is both necessary and risky. Revealing knowledge, asking for help, or sharing insight can strengthen an alliance, but it can also expose weaknesses. She learns to evaluate carefully, building bonds that protect her while preserving her autonomy. Alliances are cultivated like delicate plants. They require attention, discretion, and careful nourishment. Nightfall provides the final lesson of the day, reflection and strategy. Alone in her chamber, she reviews the day's observations, considering alliances, rivalries, and opportunities for subtle influence. She realizes that secrets are not burdens, but tools, and that her ability to manage them wisely will determine her survival, comfort, and potential power within the household. She also begins to understand the emotional complexity of her world. Alliances bring reassurance, but they also create tension. The risk of betrayal, envy, or misinterpretation is constant. Survival requires balancing caution with trust, observation with action, and discretion with strategic engagement. Each decision she makes, even the smallest, contributes to her position and safety within the household hierarchy. The young concubine reflects on how far she has come. From a newcomer overwhelmed by rules, routines, and etiquette, she is now an active participant in the subtle games of alliance, strategy, and influence. She understands that the castle is not merely a home, but a living organism, where power flows quietly through observation, action, and the careful management of relationships. Take a deep breath, listener, and walk alongside her through the corridors, noting the unspoken alliances, the careful sharing of secrets, and the delicate negotiation of influence. Each day, each interaction, and each observation builds her understanding of the complex web that shapes life behind closed doors. Here, survival depends on intelligence, patience, discretion, and the careful cultivation of both relationships and knowledge. The story of medieval concubines is not simply about luxury, beauty, or hierarchy. It is about resilience, adaptation, and mastery of the hidden strategies that define influence and survival. Secrets and alliances are threads that connect the hidden lives of these women, shaping power, trust, and opportunity in ways that are rarely seen but always felt. The castle is quiet in the early morning, yet the air vibrates with invisible currents of influence. Our young concubine has begun to understand routines, alliances, and the careful management of secrets. Today, she learns that survival is not only about observation, it is about persuasion, the delicate art of shaping others' decisions, perceptions, and actions without overt authority. The day begins in the Great Hall, where concubines gather for lessons in communication and subtle influence. Words, gestures, posture, and tone all carry meaning. The young concubine quickly realizes that persuasion is an art form in which every detail matters. A carefully raised eyebrow, a slight pause, or a well-timed smile can shift perception subtly yet profoundly. Her mentor emphasizes, power is not always forceful. Often, it is the softest voice that moves mountains. Mid-morning brings a demonstration. A senior concubine subtly convinces the lord to reconsider a minor household arrangement. She does not command, argue, or demand. Instead, she frames the discussion delicately, asks questions that guide thinking, and emphasizes benefits rather than asserting opinions. The young woman observes how influence flows through suggestion, framing, and timing rather than direct confrontation. Next, she practices small exercises designed to enhance her persuasive abilities. She is asked to encourage cooperation among attendants, mediate minor disagreements, or offer advice to peers, all without asserting dominance or drawing attention. Each exercise reinforces the principle that persuasion is most effective when it appears organic, unforced, and beneficial to others. Lunch offers another lesson. Conversations are carefully moderated, and laughter, tone, and body language are measured. Senior concubines use compliments, inquiries, and attentive listening to guide interactions. The young woman begins to understand that effective persuasion relies on understanding desires, motivations, and fears. A well-placed word or gesture can influence decisions subtly, reinforcing alliances or correcting misperceptions. Afternoon lessons focus on emotional intelligence and strategic empathy. The young concubine learns to gauge moods, recognize subtle cues of discomfort or desire, and adjust her communication accordingly. Persuasion is not merely about what is said. It is about how others feel, how they perceive intention, and how their decisions can be guided without overt pressure. She observes that influence is a partnership, a delicate dance between perception and intention. A practical exercise challenges her to guide a group of attendants through a complex task. She must balance direction with autonomy, encouragement with subtle correction, and observation with intervention. She sees firsthand how subtle guidance can achieve results far more effectively than commands or force. By the end of the task, she notices small signs of success. obedience, cooperation, and quiet appreciation, all without asserting authority overtly. Later, the young concubine observes a subtle contest of influence between senior concubines. One seeks favor by offering expertise, another by appealing to emotion, while a third uses careful timing and observation to shift perception. She notes that persuasion can take many forms: logical, emotional, social, and the most skilled combine them seamlessly. Learning to recognize which approach works in each situation is essential for navigating the household successfully. Evening introduces lessons in timing and restraint. Persuasion, she learns, is ineffective when rushed, forced, or poorly considered. Knowing when to act, when to speak, and when to wait is as critical as the words or gestures themselves. The young concubine realizes that patience is a hidden weapon, allowing influence to unfold naturally and avoiding unnecessary risk. Nightfall provides a quiet moment for reflection. Alone in her chamber, she recalls the day's lessons, cataloging techniques, observations, and subtle successes. She begins to see how persuasion interacts with alliances, observation, and the careful management of secrets. The most powerful concubines are those who influence without being noticed, shaping outcomes quietly and strategically. The young woman also appreciates the ethical dimension. Persuasion is not manipulation for selfish gain, but a tool to guide decisions, foster harmony, and protect oneself and others. She understands that power exercised responsibly requires insight, empathy, and precision, and that influence without awareness can lead to unintended consequences. Take a moment, listener, and walk with her through the castle halls. Notice how every gesture, glance, and carefully chosen word carries weight. See how subtle influence shapes decisions, alliances, and perceptions. Observe how persuasion, wielded with skill and discretion, is one of the most powerful tools in this hidden world. The story of medieval concubines is not merely about beauty, luxury, or survival. It is about intelligence, emotional acuity, and the mastery of subtle human dynamics. Persuasion, like observation and discretion, is a skill that enables safety, influence, and quiet authority. Each day, each lesson, and each interaction hones her ability to navigate the delicate currents of power that define life within the castle. Morning light spills across the stone floors of the castle, highlighting both beauty and boundaries. Our young concubine, now versed in observation, alliances, and persuasion, faces a reminder of the invisible structures that govern her daily existence, the strict and often unspoken rules she must obey. These rules are as much about survival as etiquette, shaping behavior, maintaining order, and protecting hierarchy. The day begins with a review of the household code. The mentor emphasizes that these rules are layered. Some are obvious, like proper dress, punctuality, and attentiveness. Others are subtle, such as navigating eye contact, managing tone of voice, and interpreting gestures. Failure to adhere can result in isolation, loss of favor, or subtle consequences that ripple through relationships. The young concubine understands that rules are not arbitrary. They are designed to preserve order and maintain the delicate balance of power. Mid-morning introduces a practical lesson, observing and practicing rules in real time. She walks the corridors with a senior concubine. noting behaviors such as when to bow, how to address superiors, and the spacing to maintain in the presence of different household members. She sees that rules serve both as protection and as markers of social intelligence, signaling awareness and respect for hierarchy. By late morning, she witnesses the consequences of missteps. A new concubine, unaware of subtle norms, makes an error in greeting a visiting envoy. The slight is noted, not with harsh punishment, but with social correction that isolates her from peers and draws disapproval. The young concubine learns that even minor infractions carry social weight, and that observing the rules carefully is essential to maintaining safety, favor, and opportunity. Lunch provides further instruction. Seating arrangements, timing, and conversation are all controlled by subtle rules. Senior concubines monitor interactions, noting behavior, and responding with implicit guidance. The young woman observes how obedience is enforced through social cues rather than direct confrontation. She realizes that the rules are as much about perception as compliance, shaping how others view competence, reliability, and trustworthiness. Afternoon brings a focus on hidden or unspoken rules. She is taught how to read situations, when to speak, when to remain silent, and how to act without drawing unwanted attention. These lessons are crucial. The household is a complex ecosystem of observation, alliances, and subtle competition. Mastering these rules allows her to navigate safely, avoid conflict, and anticipate shifts in power. A practical exercise reinforces the lessons. She is asked to guide a task that involves multiple concubines and attendants, balancing cooperation with hierarchy. Every movement, instruction, and gesture must respect the rules, and deviations, even minor, are observed carefully by others. She learns that adherence to rules is not mere compliance, it is a form of strategic social intelligence. Later in the afternoon, she observes a subtle negotiation of rules among senior concubines. One attempts to bend a household custom in her favor, while another enforces it quietly but effectively. The young concubine sees that rules can be interpreted, leveraged, or strategically applied, and that understanding this flexibility is essential to influence and survival. Evening introduces lessons in self-discipline. She reflects on her own behaviors, ensuring that gestures, tone, and posture align with both visible and invisible norms. She realizes that mastery of rules is not about restriction, but about empowerment, providing a framework for influence, observation, and negotiation. Each act of compliance is also an act of protection and strategic positioning. Nightfall brings quiet reflection. Alone in her chamber, she catalogs her experiences with the rules, what is observed, what is learned, and what can be applied tomorrow. She understands that rules are not enemies, but guides, offering a framework to navigate relationships, maintain favor, and anticipate challenges. Each interaction within the household is shaped by these rules, and her survival and influence depend on their careful application. The young concubine now appreciates that rules are deeply embedded in the social fabric of the castle. They maintain order, regulate interactions, and provide subtle cues for navigating alliances, rivalries, and influence. Mastering them requires observation, memory, and judgment, and doing so strengthens resilience, intelligence, and strategic skill. Take a moment, listener, and imagine walking through the castle halls with her. Notice how each movement, glance and gesture aligns with the rules, how obedience is both protection and strategy, and how mastery of these norms is essential to survival. Each day, each lesson, and each careful act builds competence, security, and subtle influence in a world where observation and discipline are paramount. The story of medieval concubines is not merely about hierarchy or luxury. It is about the intricate dance of rules, behavior, and social intelligence. Survival, influence, and authority are not granted. They are earned through careful adherence, strategic observation, and subtle understanding of both written and unspoken laws that govern the household. Morning sunlight spills into the castle chambers, catching the glint of polished stone and delicate tapestries. Our young concubine, now well-versed in observation, persuasion, alliances, and the rules of the household, is introduced to another crucial aspect of life behind these walls: rituals. These daily, weekly, and seasonal practices may seem ceremonial, even trivial at first glance, but they are the threads that bind the household together, structure power, and shape loyalty. The day begins with morning ablutions and preparation. Every gesture, how she dresses, how she combs her hair, and how she presents herself, is governed by established routines. These practices are more than cosmetic. They signal discipline, respect, and alignment with the household's expectations. Through repetition, she learns that rituals enforce structure, maintain hierarchy, and create visible markers of belonging. A simple act, like the placement of a garment or the way one approaches the Lord's chamber, can communicate attentiveness, compliance, or subtle aspiration. Mid-morning brings instruction on ceremonial etiquette. The young concubine participates in a morning greeting ritual with the Lord, the senior concubines, and attendants. Words are measured, gestures precise, and posture disciplined. Each participant's role is predefined, but subtle variations allow for personal expression and influence. The young woman begins to understand that rituals are not rigid. They provide a stage for both compliance and strategic subtlety. Observation is key. She notes how senior concubines navigate these rituals with ease, embedding influence within prescribed actions. A carefully timed smile, a subtle bow, or a measured pause can shift perception, attract favor, or signal discreet alignment. Through practice, the young concubine begins to see that rituals are both protection and opportunity, offering structure while allowing subtle exertion of personal agency. By late morning, the focus shifts to seasonal and ceremonial rituals, feasts, religious observances, and official visits. Each event reinforces hierarchy, loyalty, and social norms. The young concubine is tasked with assisting in preparations, from arranging flowers to overseeing seating arrangements. Through these activities, she learns that rituals extend influence beyond words and gestures. They shape experience, expectation, and perception in a highly visible way. Lunch is framed as a continuation of ritual practice. Seating, conversation, and etiquette follow established customs, yet subtle negotiation occurs within these boundaries. The young concubine observes how alliances are reinforced, rivalries hinted at, and influence subtly asserted during the seemingly mundane acts of dining. She realizes that rituals are a language of power, offering cues and signals that attentive observers can interpret and use. Afternoon introduces private rituals, those performed away from the gaze of the lord or senior concubines. These include practices of preparation, self-reflection, and discreet interaction with peers. Here, the young concubine learns that rituals can foster personal strength, strategic awareness, and subtle influence, providing moments of calm, clarity, and readiness for the social challenges that lie ahead. A critical lesson involves managing deviation within rituals. Minor infractions or intentional variations can signal independence, skill, or strategic intent, but must be applied with precision. The young concubine observes a senior concubine who subtly adjusts a ceremonial gesture to convey competence and subtly assert influence. She notes the reactions, approval, curiosity, or silent admiration, and realizes that rituals can be adapted carefully to communicate status, skill, and subtle authority. Later, she participates in a rehearsal for an upcoming seasonal ceremony. Each action, how garments are folded, how steps are taken, how hands are positioned, is scrutinized for precision, alignment, and decorum. Through this meticulous practice, the young woman understands that ritual mastery signals reliability, competence, and alignment with the household's values, reinforcing her reputation while strengthening her social positioning. Evening offers reflection. Alone in her chamber, the young concubine catalogues the day's lessons. Which rituals offer protection, which allow subtle influence, and which shape alliances and perception. She recognizes that rituals are not merely traditions, they are the connective tissue of household dynamics, encoding rules, hierarchy, and influence in action. Through repeated practice and careful observation, she gains mastery over both the expected and the subtle variations, preparing her for success and safety in the complex social world she inhabits. Nightfall emphasizes the emotional and strategic significance of rituals. They offer continuity, reassurance, and a framework for understanding and navigating relationships. Each bow, gesture, and movement communicates awareness, respect, and intelligence. The young concubine reflects that rituals are not constraints, but tools, shaping perception, building trust, and providing a stage for subtle exertion of influence. Take a moment, listener, and imagine walking alongside her as she moves through the castle's routines, the measured steps, the precise gestures, the silent communication embedded in every action. Notice how rituals structure daily life, reinforce alliances, and create opportunities for influence. Observe how the repetition of these ceremonies strengthens not only discipline, but also insight, resilience, and subtle authority. The story of medieval concubines is not simply about hierarchy, etiquette, or luxury. It is about structure, strategy, and the mastery of rituals that bind, protect, and empower. These ceremonies, practices, and daily routines provide both order and opportunity, allowing skilled concubines to navigate a world defined by subtlety, observation, and the quiet exertion of influence. Morning light creeps through the narrow windows of the castle, casting long shadows across stone floors and tapestries. Our young concubine has mastered observation, alliances, rituals, and subtle influence, but today she learns that the most potent weapon in her arsenal is patience. In a world governed by hierarchy, secrecy, and slow-moving power, hasty actions can undo months of careful effort. while the patient act, quietly, yet decisively, shapes outcomes.
The day begins with a lesson in waiting and watching. Her mentor places her in the library, among shelves filled with manuscripts, letters, and household records. She is instructed to observe the movements of senior concubines, attendants, and even the Lord, without intervening, commenting, or acting. This exercise is deceptively simple, yet profoundly difficult. The young woman realizes that resisting the urge to act immediately is often the first test of intelligence and self-control. By mid-morning, she begins to notice patterns: who seeks attention, who manipulates subtly, and who exercises influence quietly. Small gestures, an exchanged glance, a slight adjustment of posture, a whispered comment, reveal much about hierarchy, alliances, and future moves. Through patient observation, she begins to see the invisible currents of power that guide the household, currents that only reveal themselves to those who wait, watch, and interpret carefully. A practical exercise reinforces this lesson. The young concubine is asked to manage a minor household task over several hours, resisting interference from others who attempt to rush, redirect, or influence her decisions. She learns that patience allows one to assess risks, gather information, and make decisions that others, acting hastily, might overlook. The task is completed not by speed, but by careful timing, measured action, and strategic foresight. Lunch provides a subtle demonstration of patience in social maneuvering. The young concubine observes how senior concubines wait for just the right moment to speak, act, or signal influence. A well-timed question, pause, or gesture can yield results far greater than hasty action. She sees that patience is not passive, it is an active strategy, requiring awareness, judgment, and emotional control. Afternoon lessons focus on delaying gratification and strategic restraint. The young woman is taught that immediate reactions, impulsive words, or visible enthusiasm can betray intentions, disrupt alliances, and provoke envy. Instead, she learns to hold back, observe, and act only when the timing is favorable, turning restraint into power. Even in seemingly minor interactions, patience can amplify influence and protect reputation. A critical exercise tests her patience in a social challenge. She is asked to participate in a subtle contest of influence, presenting a suggestion, making an observation, or guiding an outcome without revealing her intentions too soon. Success depends on knowing when to speak, when to act, and when to remain silent, a skill that transforms moments of waiting into opportunities for impact. Later, she observes the patient strategies of senior concubines. One achieves influence not by loud assertion, but by months of quiet observation, careful intervention, and subtle guidance. Another gains favor through consistent, measured effort rather than immediate advantage. The young concubine begins to understand that lasting influence is often the reward of patience, consistency, and subtle action, rather than dramatic or impulsive effort. Evening reflection emphasizes the emotional dimension of patience. Waiting requires not only discipline, but also confidence in one's judgment and awareness. It demands that the young concubine resist anxiety, frustration, or envy, trusting that her careful observation and timing will yield opportunities. Patience, she realizes, is both a shield and a tool, protecting her from missteps while creating space for strategic action. Nightfall provides a moment of introspection. Alone in her chamber, she reviews the day, moments of restraint, instances of waiting, and opportunities that revealed themselves only through observation and timing. She sees how patience interacts with alliances, persuasion, and the careful management of secrets. Those who master patience shape events invisibly, protecting themselves while subtly guiding outcomes to their advantage. Take a deep breath, listener, and imagine walking through the castle with her, noting the slow, deliberate rhythms, the careful timing of gestures, and the quiet observation that reveals hidden truths. Witness how patience transforms ordinary actions into strategic influence, and how restraint shapes perception, trust, and opportunity. The story of medieval concubines is not simply about hierarchy, etiquette, or survival. It is about the mastery of timing, foresight, and emotional discipline, and the understanding that in a world of subtle currents, those who wait wisely often achieve more than those who act hastily. The castle is quiet at dawn, but a subtle tension threads through its halls. Our young concubine, now seasoned in observation, persuasion, rituals, and patience, faces one of the most unpredictable aspects of her life: the shifting favor of those in power. Favor is fleeting, invisible, and often influenced by forces beyond her control, yet it can define her comfort, influence, and survival. The day begins with the Lord's morning inspection. Concubines, attendants, and staff line the hall, each aware that attention can shift like the wind. The young woman notices subtle differences in tone, eye contact, and gestures directed at her peers. Today, someone who held subtle influence yesterday may be overlooked, while another rises quietly in prominence. She learns that favor is a dynamic force, responsive to mood, circumstance, and perception. Mid-morning brings a practical lesson, observing the ebb and flow of attention and influence. A senior concubine, once favored, receives less attention today due to the Lord's changing priorities. Another, quiet and patient, garners small but noticeable approvals. The young concubine realizes that favor is not guaranteed, and survival requires constant adaptation to shifting dynamics. During breakfast, she notes how conversations and gestures are subtly tailored to maintain or gain favor. Compliments, attentiveness, and careful alignment with the Lord's interests are visible, but small, deliberate acts, performed with grace, often carry the most weight. She begins to understand that favor is influenced less by overt displays and more by nuanced alignment with the desires and perceptions of those in authority. Late morning brings a challenge. The young concubine witnesses a dispute in which two senior concubines subtly vie for attention and approval. Their actions are measured, smiles are timed, words are selected carefully, and small gestures convey intent. She observes that favor can shift through social skill, subtle influence, and strategic alignment, and that understanding these shifts is essential for positioning herself safely within the hierarchy. Afternoon lessons focus on managing personal response to shifting favor. The young woman learns that visible frustration, jealousy, or anxiety can undermine influence and expose vulnerability. Instead, she is taught to maintain composure, observe quietly, and adjust behavior subtly. By doing so, she protects herself while remaining prepared to capitalize on new opportunities. Adaptability becomes as crucial as skill, patience, and discretion. A practical exercise challenges her to navigate a small favor shift. She is asked to support a peer whose influence is waning without drawing unwanted attention or appearing opportunistic. Success depends on subtlety, discretion, and timing, demonstrating that supporting others strategically can strengthen alliances, reinforce social bonds, and stabilize one's position. Later, she observes the interplay between rival concubines as favor shifts. Alliances adjust, settled gestures signal new alignments, and strategic intervention maintains balance. She notices that favor is not static. It is a flowing current influenced by perception, opportunity, and careful social maneuvering. Understanding these currents allows her to anticipate changes, protect herself, and act with precision when opportunity arises. Evening brings reflection. Alone in her chamber, she reviews the day's shifts, moments of tension, subtle manipulations, and opportunities to act strategically. She recognizes that favor is both powerful and fragile, a force that can elevate or isolate, and that careful observation, strategic action, and patient timing are essential to navigate its flow successfully. Nightfall offers a final lesson. While favor may shift unpredictably, the observant and patient can maintain resilience, dignity, and subtle influence. By understanding how attention, perception, and small gestures interact, the young concubine strengthens her position and ensures she remains adaptable in a world defined by hidden currents of preference and
Afternoon lessons focus on testing trust through observation and subtle challenge. The young woman is given a small task in which she must gauge whom she can rely upon without overtly revealing her intentions. Through careful attention to reactions, hesitation, and cooperation, she identifies allies and potential threats. She learns that trust is both given and earned, a delicate balance of risk and reward. A critical exercise examines the consequences of broken trust. A senior concubine feigns loyalty only to betray a minor secret, subtly shifting favor and influence. The young woman witnesses how even minor breaches can ripple through the household, affecting alliances, perception, and survival. She realizes that maintaining her own trustworthiness is as important as discerning that of others. Later, the young concubine reflects on emotional intelligence. Trust relies not only on observation, but on empathy, understanding intentions, and anticipating reactions. By recognizing vulnerabilities, motivations, and desires, she learns to build trust strategically, balancing openness with caution. Trust becomes both a protective shield and a tool for influence, allowing her to navigate the household more safely and effectively. Evening introduces lessons in repairing trust. She observes how careful apologies, consistent behavior, and subtle gestures can restore confidence after missteps. Yet she also notes that some betrayals leave permanent consequences, reinforcing the importance of foresight, discretion, and careful judgment in forming relationships. Nightfall provides quiet reflection. Alone in her chamber, the young concubine catalogs the day's lessons, moments of loyalty, subtle betrayals, and the delicate art of balancing openness and caution. She recognizes that trust is not a static gift, but a dynamic relationship, shaped by perception, behavior, and timing. Understanding and navigating this fragile currency ensures resilience, influence, and survival. Take a moment, listener, and imagine walking with her through the castle halls. Notice the subtle cues of loyalty, the delicate exchanges of secrets, and the invisible currents of trust that shape alliances and influence. Observe how each glance, gesture, and measured action reinforces or undermines confidence, revealing how fragile and precious trust truly is. The story of medieval concubines is not merely about hierarchy, rituals, or survival. It is about the careful cultivation, assessment, and strategic use of trust. Mastery of this delicate balance allows concubines to navigate rivalries, safeguard their position, and turn relationships into tools for resilience and subtle influence. In this hidden world, trust is both a gift and a weapon, shaping every interaction, decision, and opportunity. The castle is quiet at dawn, the kind of stillness that makes whispers and footsteps echo in ways that reveal far more than the casual observer might think. Our young concubine, now deeply versed in observation, persuasion, patience, rituals, rivalries, and trust, faces a final, profound lesson. The legacy of her actions, the power of secrets and the hidden influence she wields in a world that rarely acknowledges it. The day begins with reflection. Her mentor reminds her that life in the castle is transient. Lives come and go, favor shifts, and time moves in unpredictable ways. But the impact of actions, whether subtle gestures or carefully timed words, often leaves a lasting imprint. Influence is rarely visible at first, but its consequences ripple quietly across time, shaping decisions, alliances, and perceptions long after the moment passes. Mid-morning, she is guided to the private chambers of a senior concubine whose influence has endured for decades. Here, the young woman witnesses the quiet accumulation of power built not through force, but through careful observation, patience, and strategic action. Every interaction, alliance, and act of subtle persuasion is cataloged mentally by the elder, forming a network of influence that shapes the household far beyond her physical presence. Legacy, she learns, is created in small, deliberate steps rather than grand gestures. During breakfast, the young concubine observes the interplay of secrets. Notes exchanged discreetly, whispered guidance, and strategic silence create layers of influence that others rarely perceive. She realizes that secrets are both shields and weapons, offering protection, insight, and leverage. How one manages knowledge, what is shared, withheld, or revealed at the right moment, defines power as much as etiquette, skill, or charm. Late morning brings a practical exercise in influence. She is asked to guide a minor household decision without appearing to act. By using carefully chosen words, subtle gestures, and well-timed observation, she learns how hidden influence allows you to shape outcomes without overt action, demonstrating that true power often lies beneath the surface. Small interventions, unnoticed by most, can alter alliances, correct misunderstandings, and subtly shift favor. Afternoon lessons focus on the ethics and responsibility of influence. The young concubine reflects that power carries consequences. Misuse can harm allies, provoke conflict, or create lasting enmity. She observes how experienced concubines wield influence to maintain stability, protect peers, and guide decisions that benefit the household as a whole. She realizes that ethical subtlety strengthens authority, preserves trust, and safeguards legacy, while reckless action undermines both reputation and security. A critical exercise examines the long-term impact of secrets. She is asked to record minor observations and recall them weeks later, noting how hidden knowledge can provide strategic advantage, foster alliances, or prevent missteps. The young woman begins to see that the careful curation of knowledge and discreet timing of revelation are as powerful as public displays of favor. Secrets, when handled with skill, can shape history quietly yet decisively. Later, she witnesses the strategic use of influence across generations. Senior concubines share guidance, imparting subtle lessons on alliances, favor, and observation to the next generation. Influence is transmitted quietly through demonstration, mentorship, and shared ritual, forming an invisible lineage that extends the impact of decisions far beyond immediate observation. The young concubine understands that legacy is not only the mark left on others, but the continuity of skill, knowledge, and subtle authority across time.
A practical exercise, though silent, reinforces her understanding. She moves through the castle, observing, noting patterns, and mentally cataloging her interactions. She sees how her actions, though subtle, shape perception, influence outcomes, and guide others. Each measured word, every gesture, every act of restraint contributes to her enduring presence and effectiveness. Influence, she understands, is most powerful when unseen, deliberate, and strategically applied. Evening provides meditation on emotional resilience. She recalls moments of tension, envy, and challenge, recognizing that emotional control, patience, and awareness are as critical as skill or cleverness. The young concubine sees that emotional mastery allows for strategic decision-making, subtle persuasion, and long-term influence, protecting both reputation and position. Nightfall emphasizes the cumulative lessons: observation, patience, rituals, alliances, rivalries, trust, and influence, all interwoven into a single coherent understanding. She realizes that life within the household is a complex ecosystem requiring careful navigation, subtle action, and thoughtful reflection. The ability to adapt, influence quietly, and manage relationships is not only essential for survival, but for shaping a lasting legacy. Take a moment, listener, and imagine walking silently beside her through the corridors of the castle. Notice the quiet power in measured steps, the subtle influence in gestures, and the layered intelligence in every decision. Observe how patience, observation, trust, and discretion weave together to form resilience, subtle authority, and enduring impact. Each moment, though seemingly small, contributes to a network of unseen influence that shapes the household in ways few recognize, but all feel. The story of medieval concubines, though centered on hierarchy and proximity to power, is ultimately a story about skill, intelligence, resilience, and the quiet exertion of influence. It is about the mastery of subtlety, the careful navigation of relationships, and the cultivation of legacy through deliberate action. Every ritual, every observation, every patient maneuver contributes to a life defined not only by survival, but by strategic, enduring impact. As the castle settles into silence, our young concubine closes her eyes and reflects on the journey. The lessons of patience, observation, trust, and influence are internalized, forming a foundation that will guide her in every interaction to come. She understands that her voice, though quiet, her gestures, though subtle, and her actions, though hidden, carry power far beyond immediate perception. Finally, she lies down in her chamber, the soft flicker of candlelight illuminating her thoughtful expression. The castle, with all its hidden dynamics, rivalries, and rituals, has become both her challenge and her classroom. She knows that the art of influence is not loud. It is deliberate, invisible, and enduring, shaping outcomes, relationships, and legacies, quietly yet profoundly. Take a deep breath, listener, and imagine the full arc of her journey. From a nervous newcomer, uncertain and hesitant, to a perceptive, patient, and strategic force in a world of subtle power. Every lesson learned, every challenge navigated, and every act of quiet influence builds a story not just of survival, but of mastery, resilience, and enduring subtle authority. And so, as the night deepens, the story of medieval concubines closes, not with dramatic fanfare, but with quiet reflection, subtle triumph, and the knowledge that even in the shadows, influence, skill, and intelligence leave a lasting mark.